He held the mop like a prayer and the little hand in his coat pocket like a miracle. The building loomed over them, all glass and steel and clipped reflections, a castle he polished every dawn but could never enter. As the automatic doors breathed open and the warm slap of conditioned air met the cold, his daughter coughed softly and pressed her face into his side, and Elias thought, "Be invisible, be invisible, be invisible." Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're reading from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. Enjoy the story. Chapter 1, The Hour of Quiet Floors at 4:47 a.m., the city was a bruise of lights, the moon fat and indifferent above the shoulder of Atlas Tower. Elias Ochoa swiped his badge at the side entrance and guided Sophie, with two front teeth missing and a sweater too big to the service elevator, where the fluorescence hummed like the inside of a seashell. "You remember the rules?" he whispered as they rose toward the 51st floor. Sophie nodded with solemn authority, raising two small fingers, then a third. "Quiet as a mouse. Hide if strangers come. No touching the spinny chairs." "The spinny chairs are the most important part," Elias said, and she smiled, a flash of mischief of the girl he wanted to give the world. He pinched her chin and felt the tiny heat of fever that wasn't fever, just the aftermath of last week's cold. She was fine, he told himself, fine enough. School had closed that day for an emergency staff day, the sitter was at her aunt's funeral, and he had exactly 12 minutes of paid leave left for the year. Rent didn't pause for emergencies. He pulled the mopping cart behind him like a mule and they slid into the hush of the corridor. The carpet swallowed their footsteps. Conference rooms slumbered, their glass walls black as lake water. The city, far below, was awash of early buses and a single honking taxi. Elias parked the cart behind a ficus and unzipped his backpack. Out came the essentials of borrowed childhood. Crayons in a tin with sunflowers on the lid, a spiral notebook with the word composition floating across it like a dare, a soft plush rabbit whose ear needed sewing. "You can be in my office today," he said, sweeping an arm toward the conference room shaped like a snow globe. "Be the CEO of coloring." "What's a CEO?" Sophie tipped her head like a bird. "A person who decides things, I guess. Very sure, very fancy shoes." "Am I going to be sure?" "You already are," he said, and his throat did a small, tight thing that he swallowed. "Okay, under the table if someone comes, text me if you need me." "I can't text, Papa, you forgot to add minutes." "Right," he exhaled, and the truth of their life shrank the room by an inch. "Knock on the glass then, 3 times our code." She ran a hand along the edge of the conference table, the wood smooth as script, and slid under it, arranging her crayons in a precise line. He took up the mop and breathed. His hands knew the rhythm: push, swirl, pause, push, swirl, pause. Water shimmered back at him and gave him back a better man, a man with purpose at the end of a stick. The first hours were a ritual, empty trash, wipe down fingerprints that looked like ghosts climbing out of the glass. Set the conference chairs an exact 2 inches from the table. He polished the boardroom so it might catch the morning like a mouth catches laughter. He passed desks where small photos, wives, husbands, children grinned, a world hidden in pockets of cubicles. He didn't hold that against them. Everyone hid their worlds. He saved the top for last, the executive level, where the carpets were thicker and the artwork had titles like Untitled. He had never seen the CEO. He had seen the edge of a charcoal skirt once, a wristwatch glimpsed at the elevator. He had seen the emails etched in printer ink from the assistant to the CEO, capitalized and crisp. "Please note, no personal visitors at any time. Please note, food is not permitted outside the break areas. Please note, security will be notified if violations persist." "Please note" was a kind of prayer too. At 6:15, Sophie padded out and plopped the plush rabbit on his mop bucket. "I drew something," she announced. "You want to see?" "Quickly," Elias said. "We don't want to be seen." She tugged his sleeve to the boardroom. On the whiteboard, a castle rose in marker lines, proud, jagged, all windows. It had 1,000 tiny squares like sugar cubes, a door with a heart carved above it, and a jag of blue slashed across the roof, wavering. "Is that for rain?" he asked. "It's not rain, it's the blue wind." "What's the blue wind?" She patted the HVAC register near the floor with proprietary affection. "The air. The building breathes it. Today at school, Miss Marie said we should draw the lungs." "So this is the lungs of the castle." Elias frowned without meaning to. "Who is Miss Marie if school is closed?" Sophie blinked. "Oh, from last week, I like her. She smells like peppermint. If you give her extra paper, she says excellent resourcefulness." He laughed quietly, and it shook something loose. "That's an excellent word." She took his face in her hands for a second and was abruptly so close that he bit back the comfort of it. "Don't look sad, Papa," she said. "We are here together, and we will be invisible." He nodded and smoothed her hair. "Invisible," he echoed. He had barely turned back to his mop when one of the hidden doors, the kind that matched the wall panels and made rich people feel like spies, opened soundlessly. A man stepped out. Tall, precise, the kind of expensive that looked like fabric had never dared wrinkle against his body. He was not the CEO. Elias knew this much. This was Douglas Reed, Chief Financial Officer. He knew this because the cleaning crew had a WhatsApp group where they sent each other photos of the executives with captions like "Big Boss CFO" and "Where does he buy that hair?" Reed caught sight of the small girl in one sweep of his eyes, and his mouth thinned. "What is this?" he asked the air in a cool taste. "This is my daughter," Elias said, the words soft, the mop handle suddenly too slick. This is temporary, sir. There was no one to. You have violated a clearly stated policy." Reed's eyes flicked to the yes, note letters, invisible but everywhere. "Children are not permitted on premises at any time. Security will, please," Elias said, and hated the word for a heartbeat, the way it came out tender and raw. "I didn't want to miss my shift. I can't afford. That's not my affair." Reed stepped forward, squinting at the whiteboard. "The lungs of the castle." His lips twisted high. "Has your daughter also rewritten our emergency evacuation plan? How charming." Sophie, who could not always tell when she should swallow her bravery, lifted her chin. "I drew it," she said. "It's important to know how things breathe. Maybe she can advise our facilities team." Reed flicked his gaze at Elias. "Clear this room, and if I see the child again, you'll be escorted out and your badge will be deactivated." He was gone before the apology could reach Elias' lips. The door closed softly, the kind of soft that injuries sound like. Sophie's hand found his. "Are we in trouble?" she whispered. "Not yet," Elias lied. "But we should hide better. Under the table, me Ammer, for real this time." Chapter 2, The Whiteboard and the Wolf. The building woke with a sigh. Elevators thudded, doors opened, phones began to chirp their bright, insect chirr. The first interns arrived with their coffees and their shining smell of shampoo. Fellow janitors, a quiet fraternity, passed him with nods like prayers. Carlos from security did a slow drive-by in his golf cart on the 50th floor and gave Elias a look that was both warning and human. "Eli," he murmured when no one was near, "is that your Nina in the snow globe again?" "Just for today," Elias said. "I know. Be careful." Carlos's mustache confessed the years. "Reed saw you. He came down to the desk with his face like a blade. You want a thing to eat?" "I got half a breakfast burrito." Elias almost said yes to the burrito. He said no to the pity in Carlos's eyes and said, "Gracias," anyway. By 9, the glass walls flashed back a sky as polished as the floors. Someone had replaced the hydrangea arrangement, which cost more than his rent. He was finishing the hallway past the CEO's corner office, the room that always smelled like oranges and snow, when the assistant to the CEO appeared as if conjured. A woman in a pencil skirt with hair that did exactly what hair was supposed to do in magazines. "Mr. Ochoa?" Her voice was soft and precise, a knife wrapped in velvet. Will you please make sure the boardroom is reset by 9:30? We have the quarterly meeting. No artifacts on the table this time. Last meeting, someone left a small sock under the chair. It was unusual. Elias swallowed so hard he could taste his heart. Of course, yes, I will see to it. Thank you. She smiled, the line almost kind. He waited until she clicked away, then half ran to the snow globe. Sophie was gone. He checked under the table, behind the credenza, inside the little fridge where the good sparkling water lived. No Sophie. The boardroom felt suddenly like it had swallowed its lungs. Sophie. He hissed then, louder, Sophia. He heard the sound before he saw it, the squeal of spinny chairs rolling, wheels on carpet, glee barely muffled. He followed it down the hall to Conference B, where a young man in a too-tight tie was laughing, his fair hair falling into his eyes. Beside him, Sophie was spinning in circles, her arms out, the plush rabbit bouncing on her lap like an alarm. I'm sorry, Elias said, too quickly. I'm so sorry, and reached for her. It's okay, the young man said in a rush. She's okay. I found her walking around and I didn't want her to get in trouble, so we're making it look like we're arranging the chairs. Do you know where the chairs go? I think we made a triangle. Chairs go by the table, Sophie whispered to him as she slowed, conspiratorial. Elias scooped her into his arms, breathing her in as if she were a lung too. You promise you'll stay under the table next time? Chairs should be allowed to spin too, she murmured into his collar. Everything that can spin should spin sometimes. The intern's smile was earnest and crooked. I'm Sam, he said. First week, I'm learning to breathe here too. He eyed the plush rabbit with curiosity. Nice executive. Thank you, Elias said, breathless. Please you didn't, if anyone asks. Ask what? Sam said brightly. I didn't see anything but chairs. Back in the snow globe, he tucked Sophie under the table with her crayons and slid the glass door shut. He wiped the board clean with the sleeve of his hoodie. It smeared blue across his skin like bruises, and reset the chairs with exactitude as if order could calibrate his pulse. At 9:22, the assistant returned. Perfect, she said crisply. Mr. Reed will be in at 9:25 to check the investor materials are loaded. The CEO, Ms. Hart, will join at 9:30. A breath, a confidential dip of the head. She's unusual. Don't be nervous. I wouldn't even know how, Elias said, and she tilted her head a fraction as if he had said a riddle. He made one last sweep under the table. Sophie's small fingers touched his, their secret squeeze, and stepped out, tugging his cart like a shield, and then the door was filled with Reed's shoulders. This room is secure, Reed said, though it wasn't a question. It is, Elias answered. Yes, sir. We had a sock last quarter, Reed said coolly. I expect a higher standard this morning. He moved past Elias as if past a coat rack and took sanctuary at the head of the table. Where are the material printouts? On the credenza. Is the video equipment tested? The lights? He flicked a switch and a soft glow pooled across the table like a lake. Yes. You can go, Reed said, turning to his phone. Elias went. He left the glass room, his body magnetized to the door even as he forced himself away. He turned the corner and leaned his cart against the wall, pressing 2 fingers to the metal coolness as if he might leach steadiness from the bone of the building. From behind the glass, voices rose. Shoes tapped. The board members filed in, a procession of neutral colors and teeth. He could see their mouths open, their hands moving, their shoulders lean in. He could see everything except the thing that mattered most. A small pair of feet tucked in a dark space, the space not truly dark because fear has its own light. He stood there, knuckles hard, and time tried to walk without legs. Then, clear as a dropped fork in a quiet room, he heard it. A ping, then a brittle little laugh, then, why is there writing on the whiteboard? A woman's voice, crisp as the snap of a fruit. What is this? Elias' heart fell through the carpet, hit metal. He turned the corner on instinct, shoveled his body through the door before he could count the faces. The boardroom held 14 kinds of shock, and Reed's looked like triumph disguised as disgust. On the whiteboard, in blue marker that had, impossibly, rewritten itself since Elias erased it, a castle rose again, more certain this time, with arrows pointing to the vents and words like lungs and blue wind and breathe written in a child's uppercase script. Sophie had come out after him. She stood by the board, small and stubborn, marker in hand like a flag. "I asked you to clear this room," Reed breathed. "I asked you. I erased it," Elias said. "I swear I erased it." He was already moving, already reaching for Sophie, sorry spilling out of him like water. She didn't mean. "Don't you touch her," a new voice said, not unkind, simply decisive, and the room stilled without any visible command. She had arrived, Veronica Hart, CEO, who was to Elias more rumor than flesh, more silhouette than person. She came into the room like weather. She was mid-50s, perhaps, jaw a sculptor would envy, a streak of silver at her temple that did not ask permission to be pried. Her suit was the color of iron and smelled faintly, wildly, of oranges and clove, as if winter had put on perfume. Her eyes were not the cold of legends. They were the kind of blue that remembered the sky above a lake you jump into for the first time. She stepped to the board and faced the drawing. The room breathed nothing at all. "Who drew this?" she asked. Sophie raised her hand. Veronica Hart looked at her for a long beat, then knelt so she was eye level with the small rebel painter of lungs. The kneeling made a sound like respect. It shocked the room more than a shout would have. Elias saw the assistant's eyebrows rise, Reed's mouth tighten into numbers. "You understand the lungs of a building," Ms. Hart said mildly. "I'm learning," Sophie said, the marker shaking the slightest bit. "We should all be learning." She looked at Elias then, and his name appeared in the air between them as if she had uttered it, though she had not. "Is this your daughter?" "Yes," he managed. There was nowhere else. I didn't want to. The rules." His apology was a string he couldn't untangle. "Rules exist to protect people, but we should be sure we know who we are protecting." Ms. Hart's gaze moved to Reed, who had gone the color of paper. "Is this an emergency, Douglas? Are we in imminent legal peril from an art project?" "It's a breach," Reed said smoothly. "A major violation, security, liability." "Thank you," she said, and the thank you was the end of a chapter. She turned back to Sophie. "Tell me about the blue." "It's the wind. Outside wind is cold in winter and hot in summer. Inside wind is not. Mr. Carlos says the air comes out of the big metal dragon on the roof." "So it does." Her lips quirked. "What does a building do if it can't breathe?" "People get headaches," Sophie said with certainty. "And the windows get wet," she frowned. "Also Papa coughs until his eyes water on Fridays because the blue wind is too spicy." Elias blinked. He tried to become smaller, to become a stain on the fresh white. "When does he cough?" Ms. Hart asked, a small seriousness in her tone. "On Fridays," Sophie said. "At night, after we mop the basement. It smells like the stuff Mr. Manny uses for tires." "Solvents," Ms. Hart's voice sharpened. "Is this true?" Elias felt the ground tilt as every face turned. "I mean, some nights, sometimes, the storage area, there's a leak, I think, maybe. It's fine, we hold our breath, it's fine." "Hold our breath," Ms. Hart said softly, as if the phrase had brushed her skin. She stood up, smoothed her skirt, and in that motion traded the human for the title, the first creature for the second. "We've tolerated that." Reed made a small tut. "This is not inappropriate." "Douglas," she said, "sit down." Nobody sat. Everyone froze like students waiting for an exam. "Mr. Ochoa," she said, and now Elias' name was truly spoken. "Where is the leak?" He swallowed. "I don't know exactly. I'm not licensed to know, but the smell comes from the southeast corner of the sub-basement. It's stronger on Fridays because there's a delivery then, I think. Sometimes the blue wind is loud there and it steals the smell away." Reed coughed. "This is not relevant to—" "Douglas, your face is getting tedious." Ms. Hart moved to the door in a motion of such clean decision that the room lagged behind. "Cancel the first agenda item. We will reconvene in 20 minutes. Mr. Ochoa, walk me." This was the part that shocked the building, because she did not call security. She did not ask the child to be removed. She did not scold or threaten or spin the chair of power until its back faced him. She said, "Walk me," and he did, pushing the mop cart like a ridiculous chariot beside the queen of this castle, his daughter trotting at their sides like a small knight. Chapter 3. The dragon's breath. They descended through the private lift to the sub-basement where the blue wind began. The air down there always felt like secrets, cool and industrial, metal ribs and humming hearts. Pipes snaked the ceiling, vents exhaled, fans spun their palms in a blur. The maintenance crew met them in a muddled cluster, Mr. Manny among them, eyes already wide when he saw who had arrived. "Ms. Hart," he said, wiping his hands on a rag that had been clean in 1997. "We weren't expecting. We got the call from the assistant. What's the issue?" "The issue appears to be that my building has been holding its breath," she said. "Let's verify or sleep soundly. Mr. Ochoa." He led the way, humiliatingly aware of the squeak of his shoes and the ridiculousness of his mop. Sophie pinwheeled her arms and hummed, the sound a gentle counterpoint to the mechanical choir. They reached the southeast corner where the concrete had darkened like old tea stains. The smell here was familiar and sharp, the sadness of a hardware store and motor oil, the memory of car rides where Miriam would laugh and say, "Gassed us again, baby," in the back of his throat. "There," Elias said softly. "Sometimes it's stronger," Manny sniffed. "Ah, that's nothing. A bit of cleaning solvent got spilled last week. We mopped." "Manny," Elias cut in, then flinched at himself. Who was he to correct a man who had keys to rooms Elias could only look at? But Sophie's hand had slipped into his, bold and small. "It smells like ammonia sometimes like this. This isn't just cleaning stuff." Manny's eyes, dark with pride and perpetual alarm, flicked him his heart. "We have logs. We check the levels. We couldn't find a source." A slender maintenance tech, Bria, her hair braided and tucked under a cap, squatted and ran her fingers along the seam where the floor met the wall. She pressed a fingertip to something, brought it to her nose, then grimaced. "Coolant," she said. "Maybe, glycol. Could be a leak from one of the chillers on the other side of the wall. It seeps. It's not supposed to seep." Reed had come with them after all, his disapproval clinging like cobweb. "We can address this after the meeting." "You can go back upstairs, Douglas," Ms. Hart said, kneeling beside Bria. "The rest of us have lungs." Bria looked at Elias. "How often is that smell?" "Fridays, strongest around 6 p.m. That's delivery time for the replacement drums," Manny said reluctantly. "We have a vendor who swaps out the glycol. It's sealed, though. It should be sealed." "Should be" is the first cousin of didn't, Ms. Hart said, and for the first time smiled in a way that looked sharp enough to cut a contract. She stood. "We're shutting down this area. Bria, bring the meter. Manny, pull the logs for the last 6 months. Carlos," she spoke into the little microphone at her jacket's lapel, "secure the loading dock and inform the vendor we will inspect every container today." Carlos's voice crackled back, a hint of relief in it. "Copy that." "You could have filed a report," Reed hissed at Elias, low enough for only the nearby air to hear. "I did," Elias said, fluster flickering through him like a dying bulb. "Twice." The email bounced back to facilities at Atlas, and then I wrote a note and maybe no one saw. "We see now," Ms. Hart said. She met Elias' eyes without flinching and something passed between them, something like thanks, something like a forgotten recognition. "Mr. Ochoa, thank you." It was the kind of gratitude that rearranged the furniture of a day. Elias felt the room tilt again, but this time toward light. Sophie squeezed his finger 3 times and he thought to breathe. They remained there for 10 minutes that played like a small movie. Bria with her meter, Manny tracking the lines with his rag-wrapped fingers, Ms. Hart making calls that turned into actions. When Bria's meter chirped like a nervous chick and she frowned, Manny swore softly in Spanish and an unconvincing English, and Reed began to rehearse excuses that smelled like old ties. "Who approved the vendor change?" Ms. Hart asked, her voice an instrument tuned. Reed's mouth opened and closed. "Procurement," he tried. It was an efficiency that made the building sick. We will revisit the meaning of that word. Sophie tugged Elias' sleeve and he crouched, the tiles cold through his knees. Papa, she whispered, secrets curated in the curl of her lip. Is she the queen? She's something like that, Elias whispered back. Sophie considered. She should have spinny chairs. She does. They went back upstairs 26 minutes late for the board meeting, the air behind them newly suspicious of itself. Reed's steps tapped a narrative nobody wanted to listen to. The board members had to wait. Chapter 4. GHOSDS in the glass on their return, Ms. Hart didn't let Elias slide away. She ushered him back into the boardroom as if he had a reason to be there beyond the mop and the shame he'd been carrying like a spare shirt. The board members' faces arranged themselves into polite curiosity and mild irritation. The assistant raised an eyebrow so finely it could have cut a ribbon. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Hart began, a brief detour. She gestured to the whiteboard. The castle gleamed. Sophie had added a small crown on one of the windows, a joke to herself, an offering to nobody. This morning, my building told me it was breathing poorly. It told me this through a 7-year-old with a marker and a father who listens. We just confirmed a coolant leak in the sub-basement that could have become a health hazard. Thank you to the maintenance team for rapid response. We will fix it. The board shifted. Some eyebrows became amphitheaters. Someone coughed. Reed adjusted his watch as if time could be corrected manually. I'm bringing this up because we will add an agenda item, Ms. Hart went on. 2, in fact. 1, effective immediately, we will invest in a comprehensive inspection of all HVAC and coolant systems across every property. 2, we will launch an on-site childcare pilot program on floors 33 and 34 by next quarter. It was at that exact moment that the shock in the room became a wave. You can't be serious, Reed said, the polish on his words sliding. Childcare, that's not there's insurance, liability. Liability is building sickness lawsuits, Ms. Hart replied. A small heat came into her tone. Liability is ignoring the human reality of our employees. It is mourning, Douglas. Let the old century go. Childcare isn't in our core competencies, a board member murmured, adjusting his pocket square as if it were a moral compass. We have money, Ms. Hart said. We have people who work here who have children or who are children of someone or who were once children. We have the example of this morning. That's enough of a core to start with. The rest is logistics. The room crackled. Elias stood very still. Sophie, now inside his arms, chewed the ear of the plush rabbit like meditation. Ms. Hart, another board member said, lean and careful, may I ask what prompted this sudden? My mother cleaned houses, Ms. Hart said, simply, and the wind changed. Sometimes she brought me with her and told me to be invisible. You cannot be invisible forever without losing something important. It was the first time Elias had seen her look not like a statue, but like a person carrying something heavy and real. She did not soften. She clarified. We will design a system that supports our workforce, she went on. Our productivity numbers justify this, our conscience demands it. She smiled at Sophie, a glimmer warmth. Also, our future will thank us. You are basing corporate policy on a child's drawing, Reed said, incredulous. I am basing it on sense, she replied, and compassion, 2 resources we should not outsource. But the cost, Reed tried. The cost of turnover, the cost of absenteeism. The cost of replacing talent when their childcare collapses. The cost of suits when a coolant leak becomes a scandal. She pressed her hands to the table, her nails bare, her fingers square. We will find the money, Douglas. If you need a number to appease your romance with Excel, let's start with 5 million. We will re-evaluate next quarter. Elias watched it all as if someone were turning on lights in rooms he had mopped in the dark. He felt both like an intruder and like a witness. Like an open window. Mr. Ochoa, Ms. Hart said, and his name made every eye like a sun. What did you do before you came to us? He had not expected the question, not while in the belly of the building. Construction for a bit, he said, halting. Drywall, some carpentry. My Miriam, her name was a small bruise he pressed gently. My wife got sick after Sophie was born, and then I took care of her, and then she died. The room did what rooms do to grief, made it awkward, then reverent. I dropped out of the training program. Cleaning, worked with daycare hours once, before they closed the one by us. What would you do if you could train again? Something with my hands, he said, the old hunger flickering. Building the kinds of things that don't fall down, something that breathes right. He didn't expect to say it. He didn't expect his voice to want to be heard. He wanted to tuck the words back into his shirt. Would you consider apprenticing with our facilities team? Ms. Hart asked. We'll make it official. You'll continue to work, and we'll sponsor evening classes so you can complete your certification by next year. You'll be paid for the training hours. Childcare, well. She smiled with a hint of mischief. We'll handle that. The room held its breath again, and a different shock rippled. Elias tried to answer and then couldn't because the words kept tripping over the fact that the floor was solid beneath him, that this was being said where his life wasn't supposed to be heard. I don't. He's a man who says no to kindness because it never came free. I can't pay you back. You'll pay me back by helping keep the lungs clear, she said. She looked at Sophie. And one day, perhaps, by drawing me a better building. Sophie's eyes grew to the size of coins. I can draw a castle that breathes like the ocean, she said. I'll put it on the wall, Ms. Hart said, almost laughing, and then leveled the boardroom again. Is anyone allergic to children, or compassion, or better air? No, good, let's get back to our pits, gentlemen and ladies. Reed sputtered, but sputter is a weak currency. The board took their notes, the assistant's pen moved like a metronome, and in the corner of the room, a janitor felt something inside him shift like a glacier. It wasn't only the possibility of an apprenticeship. It was being seen as part of the building, not just the man who made it shine. Chapter 5. The Cold War and the warm coffee, of course, it wasn't simple. Nothing that mattered ever was. The day went on with its schedules and its stumbles. By lunch, the facility team found the source of the leak. A hairline crack in a pipe, a fitting replaced too quickly by a vendor who had billed too quickly as well. Ms. Hart's lawyers began to make calls that would label the failure with its proper legal name. An email went out, a message from your CEO. It spoke about air quality and childcare as if they were two sides of the same coin, both invisible until they weren't, both necessary to survive. Behind the scenes, the company's chat lit up like a slot machine. Did you hear? One message read. Childcare? Another. Hart knelt on the floor with a kid. Reed is foaming. This is not a drill. A rumor sprouted that the child was the CEO's niece, the CEO's secret daughter, the CEO's ghost of a broken past. All rumors were wrong. The truth was stranger. A janitor's kid with a marker had drawn the lungs of the castle, and the queen had listened. Reed retaliated in small ways that smelled of old cheese. The following morning, Elias found a note on his time card. Warning issued for unauthorized presence of a minor on company premises. Any further incidents will result in termination. It was printed, unsigned, unkind. He took it to the facility office with a calm that he borrowed from the memory of Ms. Hart's voice. She said apprenticeship, he told Manny, who sat behind a desk with a sticker that read, "Do argue with stupid people." She said a lot. Bosses say many things when the room is full of eyes, Manny said carefully. But I heard from Bria. She's working on the paperwork. Meantime, lay low, make no waves, no niñas with markers. No niñas with markers, Elias agreed, and felt like a traitor for saying it, felt like a father for obeying it. He gave Sophie a hug that seemed to have more bone in it than usual and left her with Carlos at the front desk for a half hour while he mopped the cafeteria. Carlos told her jokes in Spanish about chickens who didn't cross roads. She drew a chicken with lungs. At 3 p.m., as if to remind him that nothing follows an outline, Ms. Hart appeared near the elevators like a conjured thought. She wore flat shoes this time and her hair was a little more winded. "Mr. Ochoa," she said, "walk with me." She led him not to the sub-basement, but to the cafeteria, which at that hour held only interns and the hum of overpriced fridges. She poured coffee for them both and added cream to hers and sugar to his without asking, a small shock, a smaller intimacy. I said earlier my mother cleaned houses, she began, not looking at him, stirring a storm in her cup. She used to drag me to buildings like this and make me sit under tables and draw on grocery bags. It is not lost on me that we are repeating that and unspooling it at the same time. She lifted her eyes. You wrote to facilities. You were ignored. That is unacceptable. I don't want anyone to be in trouble, he said, reflexively. I just wanted the air to not be spicy. She smiled, a quick cameo. You are a marvel of understatement. Douglas is in trouble not for you, but for a dozen decisions that preceded you like a ramp to a cliff. Also, for his lack of imagination. He blinked. What will happen? I'll ask for his resignation when I'm ready, she said, and sipped. I'm not ready today. He knows things that are useful. I also know things. One of those things is this. We cannot keep a man in a room on the 51st floor if he insists on making everyone under it hold their breath. Elias couldn't help it. He laughed, a brief bark, and then clapped a hand to his mouth as if laughter were contraband. Ms. Hart watched him. How are you feeling? He touched the warning paper in his pocket. He thought of Rent, of Miriam's laugh, of Sophie's gap-toothed courage. He thought of the way his palms had sweated when Reed spoke, the way his chest had warmed when Ms. Hart knelt. I feel like if I breathe too deeply, I'll wake up, he said. Good, she said. Breathing is proof. We'll formalize your apprenticeship by Friday. In the meantime, keep doing what you do and take this. She slid an envelope across the table. It had weight. Weight is the older sister of help. I can't, he began. Inside, she said, is a voucher for a week at the daycare down the street. We will reimburse you until our program opens. It's not charity, it's a bridge. Let me offer it and let yourself take it. He took it slowly, as if it might explode into 1,000 origami cranes. Why are you doing this? He asked, not with suspicion but with the need to map the world. Because it's smarter, she said bluntly. Then, softer, because when I was 7, a woman in a suit told me to stop drawing on the back of a financial report because it was precious paper. She wasn't wrong. The report was important. So was the drawing. We can hold both. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me too quickly, she said. I'm going to ask you for things. He blinked. What things? Honesty, she said. Attention, patience with bureaucracy, ideas about how to make the building breathe better, and maybe a castle drawing for my office on a bad day. I can do those, he said, and surprised himself with how certain he sounded. Chapter 6. Rupture bad days like pipes happen at pressure points. On Thursday afternoon, the building whined. Not a song, not a roar, just a tremulous uncertainty in the bones of the place. Bria pelted toward the stairwell, Manny behind her, Elias trailing, and they spilled into the machine room where a valve had seized like a heart stopping mid-beat. The noise was the sound of a jam becoming a break. Bria's hands moved confident as a surgeon, Manny cursed the gods of procurement and poor training. Elias stood by, the old itch of want to help crawling up his fingers. Hold this, Bria barked and shoved a tool into his palm. When I say turn, turn, he turned when told. He felt the pressure fight him, felt the hiss whisper secrets, felt the rim of usefulness seat itself in his grip. He threaded the tool where it should thread. He listened and learned as if soaking up language. Together they coaxed the building's heart to remember its rhythm. It shuddered, then resumed. The sound of normalcy, the hum of the blue wind, was sweeter than music. You're a natural, Bria said, wiping sweat from her brow. Should have had you down here months ago. Elia's chest spread. I thank you. Don't thank me, she said, in a gentle imitation of somebody else. You showed up. Manny, she added, calling over her shoulder, tell Reed to stuff it if he comes down here complaining about cost. He can come turn a valve himself. Manny grunted a laugh and turned it into a cough when Reed appeared in the doorway with a leaf's worth of fury and a calculator where his heart should be. What is this circus? Reed fumed. Do you know what it costs when operations halt? What would you like to cost, Douglas? Ms. Hart's voice came from behind him, casual as a knife tossed in the air and caught by the blade without blood. Everything costs. So far, this has cost us people who can breathe. We'll take it. Reed faced her, composure pinned like a badge. We can't keep doing this publicly. The board is already murmuring about optics. You upset people with your performance the other day. That performance prevented a leak from becoming a lawsuit, she said. Kindly upset is my brand. Your brand is going to, Reed stopped. It was not the words that stopped him but the scene. Elia's holding a tool, Sophie somewhere upstairs probably coloring a chicken with respiratory accuracy, Ms. Hart uncrumpled in the storm. He chose a different tack. Very well, fix the leak. Launch your daycare circus. When the numbers don't work, remember who told you. I will remember, Ms. Hart said. I don't forget men who tell me not to breathe. He left with the air of a man who is saving a speech for later. Chapter 7. The deeper twist Friday arrived with the envelope of the apprenticeship formalized. Elias held it like a passport. It was gray and simple and had his name spelled correctly. He took it to the break room and sat in a chair and stared at it until Manny shook his shoulder with a dangerous softness. Get used to the chair, Manny said. Keep the humility. Replace it with pride slowly. Too fast, and Reed will smell it. Do you think she will fire him? Elias asked. One day, Manny said. He has stayed alive because he eats snakes for breakfast and they are not on the menu yet, but Ms. Hart is changing the menu. Elias snorted. She is. He left the room and found Sophie by the front desk where she had built a small city out of pens. Carlos was adding a bridge with a stapler when Sophia whispered, Papa, a man asked me questions. What man? The man with the shiny shoes who smells like cologne, she whispered. He said, what school do I go to and what's my last name and if I like living here. He said he was a reporter. Elias blood iced. Reporters. He imagined headlines. CEO launches childcare after janitor's child found hiding under table. He imagined Reed on the phone feeding the details to a friend of a friend. He imagined the wind inside the building suddenly tainted with the metallic taste of gossip. I told him we don't talk to strangers, Sophie said, satisfied. Carlos stood like a bear. That's right, Carlos rumbled. No reporter gets past my bear. At that moment, the elevator opened and Ms. Hart stepped out, her assistant in tow, a text lighting her phone like a small explosion. Her eyes flicked to the three of them and softened. Shall I expect the press? She asked wryly. Elias swallowed. They were here. They will always be here, she said. Rumor is the first draft of policy. He almost said, I'm sorry. Instead, he said, are we in trouble? We are in velocity, she said. Trouble is not always the same as movement. She angled her head toward Sophie. Ms. Ochoa, have you drawn me a castle today? Sophie pointed to a piece of paper on the desk where a structure rose like a promise. A building with ribs, balconies like piano keys, air vents that looked like open mouths singing. At the bottom, in big letters, she had printed, Do not hold your breath. Ms. Hart smiled as if she had been handed proof of something she had always suspected. Brave, she said. Would you sign it for me? All important documents require signatures. Sophie printed her name with care. Elias watched insolent tears line up in his eye like tourists. Then came the sound that no building wants to make, a siren, not loud, not panicked, an internal alarm, the shape of it metallic. Bria's voice burst through the air via the intercom. Facilities to elevator shaft C now, she said, and her voice was taut in a way that made Manny drop a wrench without looking. Ms. Hart didn't run. She walked quickly. Elias followed without thinking because now his body knew where to go. Carlos threw a nod to his partner to cover the desk and trailed like a shadow leashed to them. At the elevator bank, a car had stopped between floors, the doors wedged, the blue glow inside those small rooms a flickering fish tank. A murmur rose from the gathered. 2 interns were trapped inside, their faces ghostly behind the glass. Power cycle it, Manny barked to the control panel operator. Power cycling, the operator said, fingers dancing. Sophie stood beside Elias, her rabbit clutched like a talisman. Are they scared? She whispered. Yes, Elias said, but we're here. He'd barely finished when the elevator stuttered. The operator swore. No response, he said. Wait, Elias said then, surprising himself again. Wait. He knelt at the seam of the door, pressed his ear, felt with his fingertips. The air there was weird, warm and then suddenly cold, the whisper of the building drawn through an impossible straw. He looked up at Bria. The pressure, could the blue wind be making it harder for the doors to open if there's a difference between the hallway and the shaft? Bria's eyes sparkled like a math problem solved. You beautiful bastard, she said, and hit the intercom. Operator, reduce the ventilation in shaft C by 20%. Increase in hallway. Equalize the pressure. Now. The operator's eyes went wide and then he did as instructed. The air changed. It was subtle like a sigh. The doors responded to the world being briefly, minorly fair. They slid open. The interns spilled out, shaky and grateful, their faces the color of new paper. You saved me, one blurted to Elias, tears a ridiculous theater. You totally saved me. I remembered something someone small drew, he said, cheeks red, ears redder. He felt Miss Hart's gaze on him like late sunshine. Okay, Miss Hart murmured to no one. That's enough proof. Chapter 8, Accounting for Breath. The fallout came, as it always does when someone tilts the building. Some board members balked. One resigned with a pious email about fiduciary duty and discipline. Reed attempted a soft coup, calling 3 directors the night of the very day the interns' breath found them. Ms. Hart found out before breakfast. At 9, she called an all-hands meeting. People crowded the auditorium, the floors, the aisles, the walls. The cleaning crew, which always listened from the sides, were ushered to the front rows by ushers who looked slightly confused by the ethics of it. Elias stood with Manny and Bria, Sophie hand in his, Carlos a mountain behind them, Sam the intern bobbing like a buoy nearby. Ms. Hart stepped to the podium. She did not wear a suit of iron. She wore a sweater the color of afternoon, and she looked like someone who had slept because she had work to do, not because the world was safe. I would like to talk about the future, she said. I would like to talk about how it breathes. She spoke about the coolant, about the axis of safety and numbers. She spoke about the elevator and the quick-think that had made the doors curious about opening. Then she spoke about children in buildings and how those buildings either allowed parents to be human or scissored them away from themselves. I have been told that childcare is not our core, she said. Our core is people. A murmur, which she allowed to flourish. We have not always acted as if that is true. We will begin to. She looked at Elias and saw him, and that look itself was a kind of policy. In recognition of attention paid, where it matters most, we are establishing a new role, apprentice technicians who will train with our facilities team. The first of these will be Mr. Elias Ochoa, who today reminded us that responsibility does not require a title. The building gasped and then applauded, and the applause went from polite to teeth-bared to something like stomping. Manny whooped. Bria pumped a fist. Carlos laughed like a seal. Sam yelled, "Let's go!" as if at a concert. Sophie clapped until her hands were pink, her face lit as if someone had turned her into a light. Reed stood at the periphery, a man who had missed the rhythm. And, Ms. Hart went on, unbothered by his shadow, effective today, Douglas Reed will be stepping down from his position as CFO. The room didn't gasp. It hissed and then went silent. Silence is its own applause. Ms. Hart waited, let it settle. He has done work that was useful. He will go on to something that suits him. She lifted her chin. We will seek an executive who knows how to count not only money, but the cost of the air that gives it meaning. Later, the press would debate. Had she planned it all along? Did she seize a narrative and use it to restructure? Was she sentimental? Was she ruthless? The truth was that she had been carrying a key in her pocket for years and needed the right door. The janitor's child had drawn the door. The building had whispered its numbers. She had turned the key. Chapter 9. The particles we live by months unfolded with the smallness of work and the largeness of change. Elias apprenticed with Bria and Manny. He learned the names of things and the names of the reasons for those things. Expansion tank, chiller, Belimo valve, the diagram that looked like a subway map but felt like veins. He learned how to listen for the sound of a malfunction, not the scream but the murmur. He learned to sleep with his hands less clenched. At night, he still missed Miriam so fiercely that the word missing felt like a joke. But the missing no longer devoured everything else. It sat beside other things now: pride, attention, the marvel of a child's homework done on a daycare table he could afford. Sophie thrived in the pilot program, which had a name that made Elia's tear up every time: Atlas Nest. They had stolen it from a contest the interns ran, and Sam had voted for it 20 times under different emails. She learned to build small bridges out of popsicle sticks and a tower of blocks that did not fall when the air conditioner kicked on. She drew castles for Miss Hart sometimes, and Miss Hart hung them exactly where only she would see them when the day went hollow. On certain afternoons, Elias would find Miss Hart standing by one of the big windows on the 51st floor, hands in her pockets, looking not at the city but at their reflection. She would nod to him, and he would nod back. They did not have to speak to understand that something in the building had rearranged its bones. Reed's departure was messy but not spectacular. He fought on quiet, legal battlefields that would have bored Sophie and Manny to tears. He lost. He left. The new CFO arrived with less hair and more calm and eyes that crinkled when he said childcare like it was a line item and a poem. The childcare center opened with paper cranes. Employees cried in the hallways as if they'd been holding their breath for a long time without knowing it. Somebody brought a cake that said thank you, lungs in sugar icing. Somebody else brought a plant that would die within a week, but meant everything for the days it lived. "You did that," Manny said to Elias, in a tone that meant you did your part of it. "We did," Elias said, and meant all of us who kept breathing when it felt like we shouldn't. Chapter 10, the last light the day Sophie turned 8, she stood on a chair in their kitchen with a paper crown that said CEO of Spaghetti and announced she would build a building that fell asleep when people did, so the lights would stop wasting stars. "That's called being an architect," Elias said, stirring sauce that had learned to be delicious in their home because the home insisted. "Like an archaeologist but with buildings?" she asked. "Exactly," he said. "You dig into the future." He tucked her into bed that night and sat by the window as the city threw itself forward and back. He thought about the moment when Miss Hart had knelt, about Reed's sputter, about the hiss of pressure equalizing when two spaces decided to be fair to each other. He thought about the way his life had been one long holding of breath and how it felt to lift his face to a blue wind that wasn't too spicy. He thought that perhaps Miriam would have said, "See?" and he would have said, "What?" And she would have kissed a place under his ear that made things less impossible. He went to work the next morning as dawn made the building's skin gold, and he found a note taped to the snow globe door. It was written in a hand he recognized, firm, ex-serviceable, with a touch of elegance. "Mr. Ochoa, I have been thinking about how to measure what we have done. Money will tell part of it. Air meters will tell another part. But the true measure will be moments like yesterday, when I saw a receptionist put a lunchbox into a small refrigerator marked with smiley faces and then go upstairs without her shoulders tightened. When I was a child, the most beautiful thing in a room was always the exit sign. It meant my mother could leave the building that made her invisible. It meant that for a few hours, we could breathe without asking. I would like our exit signs to stay beautiful, but I would like the rooms to be, too. Thank you for reminding me to listen to air. VHPS, we found your daughter's sock in the boardroom again. I pinned it to the corkboard so it can be famous." He laughed out loud, a sound that bounced off glass and made a maintenance tech look up and grin. He folded the note and put it in his wallet behind his driver's license, where old wishes were supposed to go. He mopped the floor of the 51st and watched the water settle into a reflection of the ceiling lights. It looked like stars in a lake. He thought, not for the first time, that some miracles are small and walk in through service doors. Epilogue. Closing the castle years later, when the childcare center had a wait list, and the building had a reputation for not making people hold their breath. When Sophie was drawing buildings that looked like symphonies and Elia's had a badge that said engineer and hands that fell asleep for different reasons, they would sometimes stand together in the boardroom, the snow globe, and look down at the city. "Do you think she remembers our castle?" Sophie would ask, lighter now, heavier in all the right ways. "She never forgot," Elias would answer, and he would know because sometimes he still got notes, not as often now, and the notes said things like, "The vents on 23 are singing. I think they are happy." It would not be perfect. They would argue with the world and lose some days. The building would complain in the winter and sulk in summer. Manny would retire, and the new Manny would be annoying for a while until he was. There would be a week when the daycare closed because of a stomach bug, and everyone would be grumpy and bring their children in little puffy jackets anyway, and Ms. Hart would walk around with boxes of crackers, as if crackers could fix anything, and somehow they would. On the last day that Ms. Hart worked in the building, a decade after she had knelt in front of a little girl, she called Elias into her office. She still smelled like oranges and clove. Her hair was so silver that the light loved it. She handed him a small frame. Inside was a drawing, a castle with blue wind and lungs and a heart above a door. The signature at the bottom was a child S. "I promised myself I would give this back to you when it had done all the work it needed to do for me," she said. "Are you leaving?" he asked, and his voice had the edge of a little boy's. "Leaving this chair," she said. "Staying in the building, I'll consult for the foundation. I'll walk around and annoy the new CEO with my ideas. I'll ride the elevator as if it were a poem. Also," she smiled, crooked and clean, "I would like to sit sometimes in the childcare and read stories badly." "You read well," he said, and realized she had done it. Buildings could be rooms where people were seen. "Keep the lungs clear," she said. "I will," he said, and he meant the pipes, and he meant the people, and he meant the way he would kiss Sophie's cheeks at night, and he meant the way he would say hello to the janitor on his first day and would not make him be invisible. They hugged then, because sometimes policy is physical. He almost said thank you and didn't have to. She almost said you're welcome and didn't. They both breathed. On his way out, he taped the drawing back to the corkboard in the hall where it had lived and left and returned again. He pinned it with a thumbtack, the old hole fitting the new pin as if waiting. He stepped back. People stopped and looked, some of them not knowing what the picture meant, some of them knowing so much that their day reconfigured around it. Sophie came by later and replaced the tack with a tiny golden star she'd bought with pocket money. That night, as Elias turned off the last light on the floor, he paused at the boardroom. The snow globe reflected the city back, and the city reflected the snow globe back. Between them, a building breathed. Between them, a man who once held a mop like a prayer and a hand like a miracle had become something else without losing either. He rested his forehead against the cool of the glass and closed his eyes and remembered that the world had shocked him once by being kind. He promised to let it shock him again. Outside, beyond the castle, beyond the numbers, beyond the lungs, the wind blew. Not blue, not named, just air moving from where it was to where it needed to go. He opened the door and stepped into it, and it stepped into him, and for a long, uncounted moment, everything that was supposed to breathe did.